Today is my lecture related to perspective on public administration BPSC 131. This my lecture is continuation with my earlier lecture. Today my talk is on human relations approach. Myself, Dr. Sanjay Kumar Aggarwal, Assistant Professor at University of Delhi. This human relations approach is important aspects in theorizations of public administrations, which focuses on informalization of work culture studies from that perspective. And for that matter, Hilton Mayo, Roethlisberger, and Robert Owen deserve the special mentions. Particularly, Hilton's Mayo becomes synonyms with the human relations approach with his famous studies on Hawthorne studies. This studies, Hawthorne studies, is one amongst the very few research studies which have distinctions of exercising influence of for more than half a century. This study is not only on the industrial psychology, but it also pioneered and considered important aspects of human relations approach, and accordingly, he is importantly recognized as a progenitor of human relations movements. And his work laid the foundations of later works related to this, and importantly, this aspect highlights the importance of communications between workers and management. It is important even in the present context. Without communications channel, proper establishing communication channels between workers and management, it is impossible to result producing. So these aspects of science, earlier thinkers ignored these aspects. So Mayo findings were contrary to the earlier theories, and workers, which focuses on that workers are self-motivated, self-interested, but his work on the motivation revolutionized the theory of practice of management because this focuses on the particular aspects of communication, developing a communication channels between workers and management and informalizations of work culture. From this perspective, what is more important to understand the contributions of Professor Elton Mayo? Actually, his work in 1926, he joined as an associate professor in industrial research and director of Department of Industrial Research. From there, he joined in 1929 as a professor of industrial research at Harvard Business Administration, where he undertook the path-breaking Hawthorne experiments. And importantly, he concentrated his studies attentions more importantly on the private industrial establishment and was supported by Rockefeller and Carnegie Foundation grants. After the retirement in 1947, he moved to the Surrey, UK, where he died. But in tribute to his contributions, Elton Mayo schools of management are established in Adelaide. But what is more important that the influence of the work of Elton Mayo is widely visible in world famous psychologists Pierre Janet and Sigmund Freud and was profound on the Mayo. Pierre Janet and Sigmund Freud, it had important role in shaping and influencing aspects of psychology, psychological angle. And in all his research program, Mayo focuses attentions on the behaviors of the workers and their production capacity, keeping in view the psychological, physiological, and economic aspects. He called this as a clinical method. Mayo published a few books and contributed a number of scholarly articles in several journals. So, psychological and physiological and economic aspects deserves special mention in his studies, and accordingly his various work is being published in various reputed journals on that time. His early experiments, prior to the Hawthorne experiments, Hilton Mayo focuses on his studies, mostly primarily his studies concentrated on the fatigue, accidents, productions levels, rest periods, and working conditions. And all these informal aspects deserve special mentions in his studies and those time of industrial workers at the factory. What happened in 1923? While at Pennsylvania, he was involved in the research before he subsequently became the world famous. He started his research in the spinning department of textile mill near Philadelphia. This mill provided all facility to the workers and are well organized and considered to be the model organization. Despite these considerations, every aspect of the workers, he deserved a special model and organizational setup. Employees were highly enlightened and human, but what is important aspect to understand that despite this, director of personnel and president faced the problem of mill spinning department of the textile mill. Despite this model organization facilities being given to the workers and their well organized setup, labor what is important here to understand that labor turnover in all departments estimated to be approximately only 5 to 6% per annum. While new spinning department, the turnover was estimated nearly 250%. It means that about 100 industrial workers are required every year to keep about 40 working. Since it was a crucial department for smooth functioning of the mill, the management introduced number of schemes, maybe incentive schemes by way of incentivizing them, but surprised to note that despite all this attractive scheme of incentivizations, they failed to retain the workers. So only 5-6% of turnover is visible and they are not in a position to understand what is the problem despite the model organization, important facilities being provided to the workers, they are not able to understand it. And several times, efficiency engineers were consulted for that, and several financial incentives, as I told you, were introduced for their suggestion, but they yielded no appropriate return. Despite that, the turnover is not increased. Despite the setback, president, what is more important, president and director of the mill refused to accept this kind of situations that beyond it is not beyond it is beyond the remedy levels. They understand that there is some problem in the functioning of provisions of management or whatever. So Mayo for from that angle been consulted and Mayo studies the problem of multi-spinning department and from various angles, physicals maybe, social and psychological angle, Mayo studies, and accordingly, with the help of long perspective observation, he found that every piece of workers in a mill spinning department suffers from food trouble and there is no immediate relief remedy is available to them and that is also not visible food trouble is not visible and accordingly these troubles develop since every piecer had to walk up and down in a long alley and distance of 30 yards or more. Either side of machine's head was operating for the spinning of frame with cotton thread. So they not only have to move in a double story building from up and down, they have to work within the yard of 30 yard and more, and they have at the same time they have to spinning the frame with a cotton thread as well. While these frames move back and forth, workers are expected to watch working of machine very closely to weave the ends together whenever there was a broken thread. So they have to manage the broken thread as well apart from other role and responsibility given. And since there are 10 to 14 work machine and they had to look after, they felt miserable attending each job meticulously. It's impossible. They are not in a position to manage all these activities within a movement of up and down and managing the state managements and other thing. Mayo also found that although there were 2 or 3 pieces and sections everywhere located far apart from the communication, there is no communication channels between them, and it is also difficult due to the noise of the machine in between. So all these kinds of things, lack of communications and due to noise of the machines, they are not able to talk with each other. And added to this, some of the workers were very young, in the 20s, and others were in 50s. So also this is the age gap also. So sometimes no mutual communications was seen. And accordingly, all of them confessed that they were too fatigued to enjoy social evening. In the evening, they are not in a position to enjoy because of fatigue and so many other pressures, social tensions. But the workers would never protest for that matter. Workers never protest as they most of them work under the company president who was a colonel in the US Army in France before and during the First and Second World War. Actually, later he also had experience of the World War. So Mayo found that these details, with the help of nurse of the participant observation methods, that what kind of problems workers are facing, each pieces of work workers are facing, to whom workers confine the problem on the promise of maintaining secrecy. And this provisions is given to the nurse with the maintenance of the security. So that is important aspects which Mayo tried to infer with the help of nurse. On this basis, the information collected by nurse and his own finding, Mayo with Mayo with the permission of management started experimenting with the rest period. And he introduced two rest periods of 10 minutes each, one in the morning and another in the afternoon with every team of pieces. So this is the one aspect which encourages the workers' motivations, and it brought fruitful results. And so accordingly, this rest period, two rest periods is important from Mayo studies point of view. Gradually, this rest period schemes were adopted by all workers to eliminate the problems of physical fatigue. The worker evinced interest in the scheme and were pleased with the results accordingly. And this system melancholy disappeared. Labor turnover almost came to an end, production increased, and morale improved. So, with this kinds of rest period, two kind of rest period, turnover, production increased, and morale also improved. This is important result with Elton Mayo and team found. In addition to these eliminations of physical fatigue, Mayo suggested again a new formula to earn bonus, which the mill spinning department never had. So this earning bonus system under this scheme, if workers were to produce more than certain percentage, they would earn the bonus in proportion to the extra production. With rest period and new bonus formula, the workers were happy. So this also motivated their morale also and their involvements. But this new scheme were also faced with the problems. But is the problem that supervisor, the immediate supervisor, never liked the sight of worker lying asleep on the sack while they did not enjoy the same privileges. So this is one important problem from management or supervisory level, and they suggested their workers should earn their rest periods. That is to say that if a task was finished in a given time, men were allowed to rest. Under new scheme, the workers earn 3 to 4 rest every day. So this is important aspects during those studies. But the situation continued for some time. But in view of heavy demands of the goods and services, supervisor has to done away with this new system. Within a week, productions fell, and the workers were unhappy, and all symptoms started reappearing. So, at this point juncture, president of the company, the colonel, took charge of the problem, and after prolonged discussions with the Elton Mayo and team, member of his research team, president ordered that the spinning department should be shut down for 10 minutes, 4 times in a day. And instead of 4 rest period time is given to all hands from the supervisor down to the workers should avail the opportunity of this 4 time of rest in a day. With this, pessimism disappeared and productions picked up and workers started earning bonus. This again, I told you that it establishes a motivation and boosted the morale and bring a proper communication channel as well. In this, Mayo first research studies was able to probe into the problem and it suggested the remedies. And he found that Colonel, a sincere president who had immense faith in workers, invest interest in their welfare, and true to this military background, neither waived off his decisions nor forget his men and their problems. In addition, the president also introduced another change. He placed the control of rest period squarely in hands of workers, which he led consultations among the workers. So that also an important aspect. Social interactions was set in motion with this, and new awakening began, whereby the assumptions of rebel hypothesis, which assumes mankind as a horde of unorganized individuals actuated by self-interest, was questioned. So earlier, rebel hypothesis was being questioned, and accordingly, important remedies, this colonel gave the hands to the workers in participation in management and controlling these aspects. So Mayo summarized this finding in his experiments that spinning produces postural fatigue and introduces the pessimistic reveries. So one aspect. Then rest pauses relief to them, and these conditions increase productions by restoring normal circulations, relieving postural fatigue, and interrupting pessimistic reveries, which is available earlier. So these two findings also in continuation of that, rest pauses are more effective than they are regular, and workers have received instructions in techniques of relaxations. With this, the life of the workers outside the mill, social life, which also improved as workers became more interested in their families and became more sober also. So their mental state of affairs is now under the limit of control, and they behave like a social animal, and accordingly they able to solve their family problem, and they modify their behavior as a sober. And so Mayo believed that the turnover was not the result of working conditions. With this kind of thing, Mayo found that turnover was not the result of the working condition, but the result of emotional response of the worker to the work performed. He also believed that monotony per se was not its problem, but repetitive work done under the condition of isolations, which mill spinning department faces, lead the abnormal preoccupations. So, with these kinds of findings, turnover and working conditions and monotony and abnormal preoccupation, isolation, these aspects deserve very special understanding for further studies. And accordingly, what is more important that, as I told you, that Hilton Mayo and his team took the path-breaking important studies, which we know Hawthorne studies, which is divided into various phases, and it brings the important movements in theorizations of public administration in terms of human relations approach. So Mayo major involvement was to now the Hawthorne study in Western Electric Plant of Chicago, where 25,000 workers was conducted research, their understanding in different phases. At that time, it was felt that there was a clear-cut cause and effect relationship between physical work and environments, and their well-being and the productivity of the workers. So, clear-cut understanding that there is a cause-effect relationship between the physical work and environment and their well-being and their productivity of the workers. So, management assumed that given proper ventilations, temperature, lighting, and other physical conditions and wage incentives, the worker could produce more. If proper these kinds of aspects is being given with proper ventilation, temperature, lighting, their production will increase. So with this, the problem block efficiency were believed to be improper job design, fatigue, and other conditions of work. So for this, the improvement is needed. So this eliminations of workplace was also believed to be the important aspects. A simple understanding which later did not prove so well, But illuminations of workplace was also believed to be the important aspect since it affected the quality, quantity, and safety. Therefore, the National Research Council of National Academy of Sciences decided to examine the precise relationship between illuminations and efficiency of the worker with the research program at Houghton Plan of Western Electric Company, and this research in various phases began from 1924. This first experiment, which we say Great Illuminations experiment from 1924 to 27, for this, there is two groups of female workers, each consisting of six, were selected and located in the two separate rooms, each group performing the same task. Rooms were equally illuminated, and this was the mainly designed to examine the level of productions on the basis of varying level of illuminations. And in the beginning, the physical environment and in which girls were working was established to acclimatize them to the room temperature, humidity, etc. Then slowly the conditions of work were changed to mark the effect of this change of output of illuminations. This research observed group that kept accurate record of productions. This research spread over a period of 1.5 years and established that regardless of the level of illuminations, productions in both the controlled and experimental groups have increased. So researchers were surprised to note that this and abandoned the illumination theory, as I told you earlier, and began manipulating the wage payment, rest periods, durations of working hour, etc. And subsequently, instead of group incentive plan and individual piece rate plan was introduced. Individual piece rate plan and group work payment plan is in place. All these changes lead to the continued rise of productions, reductions of the working hours and total work time in a week, provision of refreshments like coffee, soup, etc., will have a further rise in output. So these kinds of things build the morale and motivated them further. And surprised by the result, that research team decided to abolish the newly introduced privileges and return to the condition prevailing in the beginning of the experiment, that is the original condition of work, with the exceptions of individual piece rates arrangement. For a while, output fell a little, but soon it rose to the point where it was higher than any other time. The rise of production, in spite of withdrawal of incentives, puzzles the research team. So, this illuminations hypothesis was again rejected as the relationship between incentive schemes, rest period, etc., has no apparent relevance to the productivity per se. It was surmised that it might be able to interest shown by the research team in the workers or incentive wage plan that was retained while several other privileges were withdrawn. So, this aspect is important to understand. But during the winter of 1927, George Pinnock happened to attend the lecture of program of Mayo at Harvard Club in New York. Pinnock told Mayo of the rest room experiment and invited him to Hawthorne plant to unravel the problem confronted by the research team. In these studies, Mayo had the benefit of knowledge of the company officials like Pinnock, William J. Dixon, and Harold A. Wright from the academic side. T. North, Whitehead, and W. Lloyd and E. Warner and Henderson joined the research groups. In these studies, Mayo collaborated with Roethlisberger, F.J. Roethlisberger, who would become later the leading exponents of the philosophy of human relations in continuations of this Mayo, Elton Mayo. So results of National Research Council experiment were so intriguing that Mayo felt that there was a remarkable change in mental attitude of the groups, and this was perhaps responsible in the behavior of the worker at Hawthorne plants. So Mayo elaborated that the test room girls became the social unit, and because of the increased attentions of the research team, unit developed a sense of participation in its project and thus Mayo opened the door for research into the social man. The Harvard group then picked up a loose thread of National Research Council studies and found that more valuable insight into the industrial man than earlier studies. So, with these provisions, he put in place five hypotheses to explain the failure of the original Illuminations project. What are those five hypotheses? One hypothesis is improved material conditions and method of work were present in the test room, leading to greater output. So that is one. It was rejected because the level of eliminations had been purposely reduced and yet the output had increased. So the second aspect of hypothesis is the rest period and shorter working days had provided relief from fatigue. It did not explain the results since output still increased despite the withdrawal of all privileges. Thirdly, relating to the relief from monotony to increase productions was not conclusive because monotony had nothing to do with the physical environment as it has matter pertaining to the state of mind. So this is the third aspect of hypothesis. And fourth aspect is the individual wage payment incentives has stimulated increase in the output. So with this, the last and concluding hypothesis is the changes in supervisory techniques has improved the attitude and output. So with this hypothesis, he moved further and his last two hypotheses were examined and tested through supplementary experiments. These two groups of five girls each were identified for the study. These girls were placed on the individual incentive plan on a piecework basis. In the beginning, what happened? The total output went up and then remained constant at level. In the case of second group, although there were a place of individual incentive system, they were subject to variations in rest period and durations of work and changes in output were recorded. In group, in this group, over a period of 14 months, there was an average rise of output in production. Therefore, with these two group studies in different contexts, the research team explained that fourth hypothesis was rejected. And since it was not wages but something else that lead to the greater output in the both the group. So this conclusion led to the test of last hypothesis. Since the research team considered of the different sets of managers, there was a perceptible change and the atmosphere was more relaxed and congenial. The girls were allowed to talk freely and supervisors also took the personal interest. A better social situation developed within these two hypotheses and he able to succeed in concluding it. But the second important factor was the modified managerial practices. Workers were consulted and advised about changes and their views were considered, which is very important, proved to be important. This process allowed workers to feel free to hear the problems and they established new interpersonal contact with their fellow workers and supervisors. Mayo and his team has rediscovered Robert Owen, who earlier advocated more attention on the workers as against the machine by the mill owners. Mayo felt that work satisfaction depends on large extent on the informal social patterns of the group. This informal social patterns is important and work satisfaction depends on this. So he thought that supervisor could be trained to play a different role, which would help him to take a personal interest in the subordinates and discharge his duties better than earlier. He also noted that workers should be made to come out openly and with their needs interact freely and without fear and company officials. Improving morale is to be closely associated with the style of supervision. This link between supervision, morale, and productivity became the foundation stone of human relations movements. These experiments, as I told you earlier, were held as a great illuminations because it has thrown the light of new area of industrial relations. So these work satisfactions promise aspects, informal social patterns of grouping is important and bring fruitful results in behavior and functioning and proper output. So with these continuations of second experiment, second aspects is human attitude and sentiment. These studies began in 1928 and concluded in 1931. In 1928, what happened that Harvard Studies team started the same plan with special studies of human attitudes and their sentiment. They tried to understand their sentiment and their attitude to work atmosphere. And the workers were allowed to ask freely their viewpoints, their likes and dislikes of the programs, and about the policies of management and the working condition as well. And how they are treated by their bosses. All these aspects is being asked in the form of questionnaires. In the beginning, the interview schedule was tight, but there was no different direct relations between subject matter and views of work. So, we what happened that in earlier stages, we try to ask very general kind of things so that workers become accustomed to this kind of. And later, interview techniques was changed. Interviewer played a minor role. After a brief initial explanation to the topic, he displayed the real interest everything the worker spoke. These changes caught the imaginations of employee, and each one of them took more time than they did earlier in answering the schedule. After a few days, there was a change in attitude of the worker was found. Although no reforms were introduced, the workers thought, in view of their complaints, that the working conditions were changed. They also felt that the wages were better, although the wage scale remained at the same level. It appeared that there was an opportunity to let off scheme, which made the workers feel better, even though there was no material change in environment. So, with these experiments, and after interviewing around 21,000 of workers, complaints were analyzed, and it was found that there was no correlation, no direct correlations between the nature of complaint and their facts. The research team concluded that there were two types of complaints. One complaint is directly related to manifested material complaint, and second aspects of is related to the latent physiological complaint. So what happened? This Harvard team felt that preoccupations of the worker with personal problems like family tragedy, sickness, etc. Likewise, Mayo labeled them as a pessimistic refuge in his early research and inhibited the performance of industry. The study succeeded in identifying the following three aspects. First aspect is the worker appreciated the method of collecting the information on the problems of the company from them. They thought that they have valuable comments to offer and felt elated on the feeling that they had an equal status of management. This, again, I told you, to build the equal status and moral and their level of participation increased. They realized that they were allowed to express their view freely and felt satisfied with it. They entertained a feeling that the conditions in the environment were changed to the better, though, although no such change took place. So this is one aspect, and the worker appreciated it, and it built the moral and level of participation increased. Then second aspect is was a change in attitude of supervisor as well, because they realized that their method of supervision was closely observed by the research team, and the subordinates were allowed to comment freely about their supervisors. So behavior and attitudes of supervisors also changed. Third important aspect is research team realized that they had equipped new skill of understanding dealing with the fellow beings. It was felt that absence of proper appreciations of feelings and sentiments of the workers, it was difficult to understand their real problems, personal feelings, and sentiments derived from both from employee and personal history and this social situation at work. So, with this of second experiment, we move further in continuation of the third phases of author studies, that is social organization. It started in 1931 and up to 1932. This final phase of research program at Western Electric Plant was to observe the group worker performing a task in a natural setting. This with and observation methods were adopted to analyze the group behavior. A number of employees consisting of three groups of the workmen whose work was interrelated were chosen. Their job was soldered. In in the bank wiring experiments, one is solder, and another aspect is fixing the terminal, and third aspect to finish the wiring. So this experiments is known as bank wiring experiments, which we say social organization aspects in 1931 to 32. And wages were paid on the basis of group incentive plan rather than individual incentive plans. And each member got his share on the basis of total output of the group. It was found that worker had a clear-cut standards of output, which was lower than the management's target. The group, according to its standard plan, did not allow its member to increase or decrease the outputs. So that is the thing. This is the main aspects of problem. Although they were capable of producing more, the output was held down to maintain the uniform rate of output. They were highly integrated, and their social structure informal pressure was used to set right the erring members. The following code of conduct was maintained for the group solidarity. One should not turn out too much work. If one does, he is a rate buster. One should not turn out too much work. If one does, he should be named as a rate buster. Second aspect is one should not turn out too little work. If one does, he is a rate chancellor. Third aspect is one should not tell the supervisor anything detrimental to the associates. If one does that, he is a squealer. And then fourth aspect is one should not attempt to maintain the social distance or act of officious. If one is inspector, for example, he should not act like a inspector. So this kinds of unity and this kind of thing in terms of if you're willing to do more, he will be treated as a rate buster. If he not turn down the work, he's a chancellor and then a squealer, and he should not behave like officials. That kind of fourth aspect is broad group solidarity of between the workers. Mayo and his Harvard team found that the behavior of the team had nothing to do with the management of general economic conditions of the company. Workers view that interferences of the extra departmental personnel, such as efficiency men and other technologists as disturbances. They found that experts follow the logic of efficiency with a constraint on the group activity. Further, the supervisor were considered as a separate category representing authority to discipline the worker. The logic of this kind of thing, efficiency, did not go well with the logic of sentiments, which had become the cornerstones of social system. So, with these aspects, Mayo and his colleagues concluded that one should not miss the human aspects of organization. Human aspects of organization, the social angle, informal aspects is important. And he emphasizes technical economic aspects as well. The Hawthorne experiment suggested a new mix of managerial skill. In addition to the technical skill, the management should handle the human situations, motivate them, lead and communicate with the workers. And Mayo felt that the overemphasis on the technical progress and material life at the expenses of social and human life was not good and laid the blame of feet of the David Ricardo, his rebel hypothesis. Mayo suggests that concepts of authority should be based on social skill in securing the cooperation rather than expertise. So, these aspects of understanding, treating workers from the human angle is important not only to treat them as a technical and economical aspects. This aspect is important, but to bring cooperation, it should be based on the social skill aspects is important. Uh, so these aspects which I told you in this third experiment of this thing, social organizations is important and it bright, truthful results and understanding the informalization and social structure of the system. Then important aspects is absenteeism in the industries. What happened during the Second World War? Mayo came across with the typical kind of problems in the industry. It faced the foundry shops of three industrial undertaking manufacturing important components of aircrafts. In view of the war situations, there were all-round dislocations in several walks of life, including the industrial establishment. And peoples migrated from industry to the armed forces and joined the other speculative activity, which resulted into kind of uncertain situation. The turnover of the labor into industry was more than 70% and absenteeism was chronic. So this while situations remaining industry was however better, but in this aircraft industry situation is worsened, it is chronic. And alarmed at this state of affairs, management requested Mayo to study the problem of heavy turnover and unjustified absenteeism and suggest remedial measures. So, what happened? This research team started their research in 1943 on the basis of this Houston experiments. Mayo and his research team found that few distinctive characteristics in three plants. What is more important here to understand that in the industry in which turnover was minimum and absenteeism was negligible, the management was found to have introduced group wage scheme and made it clear that worker would earn group wage without any shortfall in shift of the day. In the event any shortfall or in any shift, the cut in wages was uniformly applied. So this is one aspect of uniform applicability of the wages cut is one aspect of functioning in one of the industry. And therefore all workers becomes alert and formed into a group under the natural leader who devoted time and energy in consolidating the group solidarity. Now it was turn of the employee to ensure smooth functioning of the wheels of industry. Mayo found out how this informal group demonstrated its strength and capacity in raising the level of productions by cooperating with the management. And this present case, positive response was possible because supervisor and his assistants were too busy, otherwise rarely paid any visit to the department. All the work was under the charge of men who had no official standing, no official positions, and this emerged as a natural leader. He emerged as a natural leader of the team. In the case of other two factories, there were neither informal group nor natural leaders to knit the workers into a team. So that is the problem in another two industry. In one industry, it was visible informalization naturally and natural leader. So they were unable to form a team because of certain personal eccentricities, and they were not given opportunity to form an informal team. Hence, there was a heavy turnover and labor absenteeism in productions century of industries. So Mayo prescribed that for these two industries that management should encourage formation of informal groups and treat the problem of the worker with human understanding. So these three industrial provisions, for one it is available, for two he suggested to encourage the formation of informal group and treat the problem of worker with human understanding. So this is important aspect, and he suggested that workers should be treated as a human being rather than machine, but not as a cogs in the machine. So, labor should not develop a feeling that they were subject to exploitation as well by the management. So, Mayo thought that management should take a initiative in the developments of human relations in the industry and encourage conducive situation among the industrial workers. The significance of Hawthorne experiment, however, was the discovering and of informal organization. Mayo was also interested in discovering as to how spontaneous cooperations could be encouraged in organization. So these spontaneous cooperations, informal organizational setup, all this treating them as a human setting, not as a machine, but not also as a cogs in the machine. So importantly, this increase the spontaneous cooperation aspects, increase the organizational objective, and without the breakdown, they achieve the level of satisfaction. So, realization, understanding of human factors in the work situation, and its importance of adequate communication system, particularly upward from the workers to the management, is important understanding during those findings. So, with this, what is more important here to understand that all these experiments, which I told you, and Hawthorne experiment, whether it is social organization, illumination theory, absenteeism in the aircraft industry, and likewise, all these studies, in a way, prove to be important aspects of informal work setup, treating them like a human being, and it is important to bring a kind of informal setup in group developing for work atmosphere, developing work atmosphere, and so that communication channels started from upward to management level. So, but despite that, there is a criticism, important criticism Mayo faced with. Mayo and what are the important criticism? We have to understand here that Mayo and his research findings uh, are not beyond the criticism. They have important aspects of understanding human relations oriented studies, but they were criticized on various grounds as they try to substitute human relations oriented supervisors for union representations. Mayo and his team were criticized for not understanding the role of unions in a free society. It was argued that Mayo never tried to integrate unions into the thinking and was criticized as anti-union and pro-management. So, in fact, 1949, United Auto Workers lashed out at Maoism with bitter criticism and branded Hawthorne research as a cow sociologist. So, this is one aspect of criticism. Second aspect of criticism is that various thinkers think that they brought a sweeping conclusion, and sweeping conclusions were drawn from relatively few studies which were critics pointed out were full of pitfalls. So no conclusive conclusion, the sweeping conclusions, and critics like Carey pointed out that Hawthorne group selected in their first experiments cooperative girls only, and who were willing to participate in the research program. And this type of research was worthless since the sample of 5 or 6 cannot be taken as a reliable sample to make generalizations. So, Carey also observed that evidence obtained from the experiment does not support any kinds of conclusions derived by the Hawthorne experiment. So, this is one important criticism. Second aspect is that there exists a vast discrepancy. Carey also pointed out that a vast discrepancy also exists between the evidence and the conclusions. On the other hand, data only supports, according to Carey, old view of monetary incentives, leadership, and discipline as a motivating factors for better performance. But he also criticized Hawthorne investigators for their lack of scientific base. So, Peter Drucker also criticized human relations for their lack of awareness on economic dimensions. He felt that the Harvard group neglected the nature of work and instead focus on interpersonal relationship and formalization of work culture. And Mayo was criticized for his sentimental concentrations on the members of organization to neglect of its work and purpose. A group general softness and lack of directions was visible, according to the Peter Drucker criticizes the Mayo aspects. Mayo was criticized also as encouraging paternalistic dominations of private life and even the private thoughts of individuals by the employee. Critics argue that there was no place of Mayo philosophy for conflict, and he sought to achieve organizational harmony through the subordination of individuals and group interests by the administrative elite, which is not possible according to the critics. So complete erosions of conflict is not possible. So again, in continuation of Peter Drucker, Bendix, and Fishers, they also argued that Mayo failure as a social scientist arises in a large measure from his failure to define sharply and ethical presuppositions of his scientific work. Without making presuppositions clear, the knowledge and skill which Mayo found no underravel in a democratic society deserve no higher rating than they get. Accordingly, Daniel Sell was one of the bitter critics of the human relations theory, propounded that Mayo and his colleagues uh, is not deserve this kinds of finding is not functioning for democratic country like in a patent setup. He said that methodology adopted by Harvard Group was defective. He questions the methodology itself and pointed out that to think that conflict-free state and workers' containment would lead to success of company was not tenable because some tensions and conflict were inevitable in every human situation. We cannot live without a tension, which is inevitable aspects, which was later Mary Parker Collett also pointed out in a formal setup. Formal setup we cannot live without the conflict. So this goal should be provided healthy outlet instead of indulging utopian level of conflict-free society. Therefore, the critics argued that the team displayed a total lack of awareness of larger social and technical systems. So methodology is difficult, is not useful from the Daniel Sale angles. So these aspects is important. So this criticism ranging from this uh, Carey and Peter Druckers and Bensix and Fishers and all these things, they questions the methodological framework, informalizations of work setup, developing a communication channel is a one-way route and all these things. But despite that, what is more important to understand that in conclusion that contributions of Mayo to this organizational theory is innovative and substantial. Why it is important, innovative and substantial? Because for the first time, he and his team attempted to understand the problems of industrial labor from the angle of different from the traditional approach of scientific methods. In addition to human relations in organizations, Mayo critically examines the employer-employee relationships, stability of the labor, supervision and its techniques of industrial workers. Although the detailed analysis of his work was conducted by his associate in the Houghton plant and elsewhere, he was the moving spirit behind these attempts and various stages. So, beyond doubt, his study is innovative and substantial, and for the first time, he questioned the traditional scientific management aspects and he pointed out that human relations theory is important to develop a employer-employee relationship for stability of labor is important. All these things is important. So these Hawthorne studies soon become the historic and landmark so far as administrative thought is concerned. The studies, as Drucker has put it, are still the best and most advanced and most complete work in the field of human relations. Despite his criticism, he still believed that Peter Drucker that work by Milton Mayo and his team are still best, most advanced, and most complete work in the field of human relations. Indeed, it is debatable whether the many refinements added since by labor and countless people in industry, labor union, and academic life have clarified and observed the original insight. But whatever may be the thing, it is complete in totality. So contributions of Mayo are immensely useful not only to the industrial sectors but also to the administrative system of the state, particularly in the case of bureaucracy. His work also paved the way to adequate communication system between the lower ranks of organizations and the higher levels. His main emphasis was on the individual well-being with the help of social skills in any organization. So, total contributions of Mayo his, and his studies such kind of phenomena is that he regarded as one of the founding fathers of human relations concept in the administrative thought. He was a behavioral scientist long before the terms became popular. So his contribution is not only useful, as I told you, for the industrial sector, but also in the administrative system of state, particularly the bureaucracy. And why bureaucracy is that it try to develop a kind of technique to develop a communication channels long range from the organization to the higher level, and accordingly he made emphasis on the individual well-being with the help of social skills of any organization. So it developed a communication channel that is more important. Taken as a whole, the significance of Hawthorne experiments, investigations by Mayo is discovering the informal organization, which is still realized exist in an organization. The importance of the group affecting the behavior of workers at the work was brilliantly analyzed through these experiments. So his investigations and Mayo's team investigations try to develop or discover the informal organizational setup. So, in place of formal organizational setup, this informal setup is important. Now, it is realized that it exists in all kinds of organization. So, it is important to group affecting the behavior of workers at the work. So, this deserves the special mention in Mayo study. So, in brief, Mayo contribution to organization theory can be summarized as Elton Mayo is well known for his Hawthorne experiment and considered one of the pioneers in human relations approach to organization. He developed informal organizational setup. And Mayo early experiment which was concentrated on the fatigue, accident, rest periods, and productions level etc. of industrial workers of the factories. His studies later resulted in a new awakening questioning the rebel hypothesis, which assumes mankind as a horde of unorganized individuals actuated by the self-interest. Great illumination experiment at Hawthorne's plant of the Western Electric Company, popularly known as the Hawthorne study, mainly focus on understanding the cause and effect relationship between the physical work, environment, well-being, and productivity of the worker. So, this study, later known as the bank wiring equipments, focused on the group behavior in a work situation. So, this is important aspects so far as human relations theory is concerned. Though his earlier studies, which is based on fatigue, accident, and rest period, later his questions the awakening of this Rappel hypothesis, and this work, bank wiring experiments also focuses on the cause-effect relationship between physical work environment and well-being and productivity of the workers, which is important. So, what is more important here to understand that Mayo based his extensive studies and concluded that workers' productivity is not the results of working condition, but the results of emotional responses of the worker to the work performed. So, apart from these working conditions, this emotional response of the worker is important. So, this is one of the Mayo important contributions. So, Mayo studies at Hawthorne found that there is a continuous increase in productivity of the worker under the observation in spite of positive and negative changes in the working conditions. This phenomena is called Hawthorne effect. It is a form of reactions whereby subjects improve the behavior being experimentally measured in responses to the fact that they were being observed, not in response to any particular experimental manipulations. Mayo and his colleagues concluded that one should not miss the human aspects of organization, and they emphasized that group behavior and dynamics in industrial organization greatly influence the productivity of the workers. So, this conclusion, as I told you, that one of the important evolutionary provision of human relations growth in organization, which earlier studied all these aspects, is important, and for that purposes, informal aspects is important in the organization. With this, I'm going to conclude that this study is important so far as human relations approach is concerned. Namaste. Goodbye.